Hey guys, welcome back to the Dillon England Show. It's been a little bit since I've released a podcast episode. I've had a haircut probably since we recorded this episode that I'm about ready to share with you guys today. I recorded this episode in June with Jim Heller. He's been very patient with me as I got this done. And this conversation is incredible. Jim Heller is something called a Vistage chair. Basically, what he does is he runs a group, a peer group of CEOs and entrepreneurs that they all get together, and it helps them be better. It helps them with accountability. It helps them have a place just to feel included. It's a really cool thing. It's almost like AA for business owners. It's a really cool concept. And today I asked Jim about what got him into Vistage, what got him owning businesses, and then also some tips and some wisdom for us that are younger, starting businesses. This is going to be one that I know that you are really going to enjoy. Before we jump into the show, Cool Beans Coffee Brewery, broadcast brew, low acid coffee blend. Buy yours today. It's some of the best coffee on the planet. I drink it every single day. You should too. So when you go to the website provided for you in the description below to buy yourself a bag of broadcast brew, you're directly helping the show. I would really appreciate it. Guys, thank you for your patience as it's taken me a little bit to kind of get these episodes out. I have 3 back-to-back that I'm about ready to release. So please, if you're new to the channel, subscribe, comment below your favorite part, and let me know if there's a specific guest you want to see on the show. Thank you for everything. Please enjoy this episode.
This is the Dillon England Show.
After having Mike just on the show, I wanted to talk about like Vistage. I'd love to talk about you getting to where you're at now, which is I'm sure a journey to hear in and of itself. But before we talk about your journey, I'd love to talk about what you're doing right now. So if you could kind of give an idea of like what Vistage is, what that looks like. And the reason I wanted to start there is because Mike and I mentioned in the podcast that entrepreneurship is a lonely place.
Absolutely.
And what you do, if I understand correctly, is one of the things that Vistage does is it helps those lonely entrepreneurs. It's like a AA for entrepreneurs.
Kind of, yeah, absolutely.
And so I think it's a really special thing what you do, and I think it matters to a lot of people because it is a tough game that can be lonely to play or feel lonely to play. And so tell me more about Vistage and really what you're doing right now.
So Vistage started out in Milwaukee in the 1957, I want to say. There were 5 or 6 people running businesses who figured out, in some way they figured out that they all had the same problems, even though they were in different businesses, completely different businesses. And so they decided that they were going to get together once every 6 weeks and help each other. And so that was 65 years ago. Vistage is now 45,000 people across the world who get together on a regular basis to help each other learn and grow and solve problems. So the premise is that we have groups, they're peer groups primarily for CEOs, although there are now groups for other levels in the organization. And we get together for a day every 6 weeks. Half the day is a speaker, so we're learning something. The other half is addressing what you're talking about. People that run businesses we have attorneys, we have accountants, we have bankers, and if you're a successful business, you've got a good attorney, you've got a good accountant, you've got a good banker, good insurance agent. Those people, by definition and by the demands of their own profession, are parochial. The attorney is generally going to give you legal advice. The accountant is going to generally give you accounting advice. The challenge is, as a CEO, you're in a position where you're trying to deal with all the constituencies at one time. So you're dealing with legal issues, accounting issues, customer issues, employee issues, regulatory. I mean,
you name it.
There's lots of colors to that beach ball, right? And so where do you go to find other people that understand and appreciate that and can give you advice that is nothing more than your interest? So the beauty of these organizations, of Vistage, is we put 12 to 15 people in a room who are not competitors, they're not customers, they're not suppliers, they're there for one purpose, and that is to help one another. And so the willingness to call people out on their own bullshit and say, hey, you committed to doing this, and not to berate them, but all right, you committed to doing it and you're stuck. How do we help you get unstuck?
Well, it's accountability.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, there are five premises or 5 areas where Vistage really stands out. We help people make decisions, and we give them a forum in which they can talk about and think through, what the best decision is, what might be in their way, what are their own self-limiting beliefs, those kinds of things. We help hold one another accountable to things. We help people grow, not just grow their business, but grow themselves. Learn things, develop their skills, become better leaders. We address the isolation, which to me, for me personally, I think that's the biggest thing that Vistage does, is tell people that they're not alone.
Yeah. And
then if you combine all of those first 4, that helps people deal with change. Because change is constant, and that's the challenge of leadership, is dealing with change. If everything was static, businesses wouldn't need leaders, right? You just keep doing what you've been doing.
Yeah.
So that's what Vistage does.
Yeah, I think that change is something that isn't talked about a lot, because when we talk about leadership, what's important for a leader to we could talk about, they need to be good listeners, and they need to be this and they need to be that, but they need to be able to deal and thrive in a changing environment is something that I don't hear talked about tons when we're talking about like what makes a good leader, what makes a good CEO or whatever. And I think that's unique, because it is true. Like, even in any organization, you have employees leaving every day. You have so many things. You can just, in one day, things can go from everything's great to all hands on deck, there's a fire now.
Right.
And it's a skill set to be able to deal with those things, deal with that stress, deal with everything you need to do, and not go crazy.
Right. Well, and understanding what goes into it. So it's funny, you talk about change. The most uncomfortable speaker I've ever heard was a guy named Maury Sheckman. He wrote a couple of books, one of which was called Internal Frontiers. The other one was called Working Without a Net. This is years ago. And he was a very uncomfortable speaker, but he was a very good speaker. He's probably one of the best speakers I've ever heard. He just made me really uncomfortable, which was cool, and it made me really think about this. And the premise that he has, which I've used and I think is absolutely true, is that he talks about he talked about the idea that there's a trope out there, nobody likes change. Well, that's not necessarily true, where people are afraid of change. Not necessarily afraid of change. What we're afraid of is we're not afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of the unstated knowns. What if, and like you said, we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Change, what I learned from him is change is loss. Anytime we change something, we're losing something. Even if it's a change for the better, we're still losing what we had before. So as physiologically, as human beings, we grieve those losses. And obviously the amount of grief, and it scales with the magnitude of the loss and how it affects us personally.
Sure.
But and what he proposed, and I think he's right, as Americans, socially, we're terrible at grieving. We're socialized to, men in particular, are socialized to don't talk about it, hold it in, be strong, whatever that whole list of stuff is. The reality is, and what I've learned over my lifetime is, you can hold that stuff in, but it's coming out. And Newton's law applies. So for every force, there's an equal and opposite force. So if you hold it in long enough, when it comes out, it's going to do some damage. So you can either fight it or you can acknowledge it and give it some space, and then the process is shorter. And so ever since I heard that, and this is 25 years ago probably that I heard him speak, I've really believed in that, and I've seen it. You go through losses, whether they're personal or business or whatever, and if you let that stuff, if you let that stuff come out, the process is shorter. You learn more out of it, and you move on. As leaders, it's important to understand that grief curve, the Kubler-Ross grief curve, because people grieve. A friend of mine says people grieve in doses, or we all grieve in doses, and that's true. It's not, okay, I'm starting this process today and I'll be done by Thursday. I mean, it's not the way it works. So if you've got an organization and you've got a change going on, you're going to have people at different stages of the grief process all along.
How would you define grief? I mean, like, I know what grief is, but when we're talking about like grief in business, so I think people can understand like grieving the loss of a loved one. Mm-hmm. But if we're talking about grieving in business, I think that's not a word used very often to describe like
no, it's
something
not
in business. So like,
but it happens.
Yeah. So like, what do you mean by that?
So none of this is original thought from me, right? This is all stuff that I've learned in my beliefs, but I believe that so Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a book called On Death and Dying back in the late 60s, early 70s, and defined what she called the 5 stages of grief. And so what it looks like in business is when people are at different stages. So there's denial, there's bargaining, there's anger, there's withdrawal, and I can't remember the 5th one right now, but
it's out there.
It's out there. Acceptance.
Yep, there you go.
And there's a guy who worked with her, whose name escapes me right now, who's added, with the permission of her family, a 6th stage, which is meaning, that comes after acceptance. So, what does all of this mean, and how do we apply it going forward, which I think was a really great addition to it.
Sure.
But in business, you'll see people in the organization that are angry. There are people that are denying it. All this isn't going to happen. There are people who are bargaining. Well, what if we do this instead? Mm-hmm. It's all part of the normal process. And as leaders, we're typically at the forefront of whatever the change is. So we start our grieving process sooner than everybody else because we have the knowledge. Yeah. Well, then when we roll it out, sometimes we get impatient. It's like, well, why can't everybody else come on? Well, you started this 3 months ago. You got to give people a chance to catch up.
Interesting.
So we had I had personal experience with this. We had very, very close friend of ours at a very young age contracted cancer and passed away. She had cancer. It was very aggressive. She had it for about a year. It went into remission, so we thought she was in really good shape, and then it came back with a vengeance, and 6 months-ish later, she had passed. So she passed away in the fall. In February, we were having dinner with her husband, again, very good friend of ours, and he's talking about how he's dating somebody. And we were like, whoa, this is really quick.
Pump the brakes.
Yeah. What we then realized was he started his grieving process. I mean, they knew that it was terminal shortly after she was initially diagnosed. He started his grieving process a year and a half before she passed away, before we did, right? I mean, because we weren't in front of it every day and all of that. That was a huge lesson for me in how that timing works.
It's tough, man. Just thinking of grief and thinking of what people go through, and those, I think people don't, that's a good book, I think, for anyone to read. I'd be interested to see, the philosophy of that. And, we had, I'm probably going to have him on, but I traveled on an evangelistic team for 2 years after college. So basically we went around to different churches, did Irish concerts and music and all this stuff. We were in a team of, I think me, Matt, Steven, Abby, like 5-6 people plus a family that we traveled with. The family had their kids and stuff. And so one Christmas, so the Christmas in between semesters of traveling, my buddy who was, in his 20s, married, one kid, we were all in our separate ways. We had all split up for the holidays, and we're going to come back together in January to keep traveling for another semester. And we go to 13, 14 churches a semester, one a week. So Saturday was our travel day. Then we'd be there Sunday through Friday, and then we'd Saturday go to the next place. It was really like a touring, musician thing. And then, like Aaron, he would do like revival meetings, and then it was a fun time. It was awesome. So anyway, Christmas, I was with my girlfriend, which is now wife, and I got a call that Matt, who was like only a year or two older than me, died in a car crash. And we traveled together. I mean, he was like, we're just like family, and I remember getting that call, and it was like out of body. It's like, I don't know how else, like an out of body experience. Like my friend Lauren called me, and she's like, "Hey, did you hear?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't heard anything." And then she's like, "Matt died in a car crash." And like, I was just talking to Matt, like texted him the day before, like this, he has a kid, married, just, the kid was, like under a year, I think at that point, Asa was. And so, I mean, literally like you process, like grief is such a unique thing. Cause then, you jump into denial. And, for me, it was like, God, how could you let this happen? He has a family. And then watching, less about me, but watching his wife, Carol Ann, who she's coming on the podcast eventually. Actually, we're going to talk about dealing with grief. Watching her get all the way to the meaning stage has been such a blessing. And I think for her, it's just been God's grace in her life. And God has used Matt's death in unbelievable ways for a lot of people. And as a result, but in that moment, even if your belief structure says, God has a plan and stuff, grief can just rock you hard.
Absolutely.
And it took some time. And I think all of us, when we got together, I think all of us on the team kind of like reconciled with it, and that's actually what spurred Anna and I getting married so quickly. So I was with Anna. We were just dating at the time. I was with her family in Virginia. I got the call. Over the next 2 weeks, Anna saw me at my lowest point I've probably ever been. And I remember thinking, like, if this woman is willing to walk through this with me and see me in my worst state, spiritually, physically, emotionally, and she's still willing to love and want to be part of a care, like she'd walk through anything with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so 2 weeks later, I bought a ring. I'm like literally that December, I had a ring, and I proposed to her. Like she's gonna be mad at me, like March or April, I don't remember. But I just knew, like it was just one of those events that I think really just spurred on.
It's another aspect of the meaning.
Yeah.
Your situation is another manifestation of that meaning.
Yeah. The other lasting impact that he had on my life was. So I talked to the podcast about I've had a big issue with my toe. This is we're getting somewhere. Just let me get there. This is going around.
I'm with you.
So my toenail has been I've had major issues with it for years. It's because of Matt. And we were in Lincoln Park. We interned at a church down the road. We did this internship. Helping the goal of the internship is people that want to plan a church. How do you plan a church? How do you get that? Whatever. So we did this internship together, and we were at Los Arcos Tacos in Lincoln Park, and I was in flip flops. And so Matt was a heavy gentleman. Like he was short, stout. He was present, bodily, and I was wearing flip flops, no socks, nothing. And we were in like a 4-corner chair situation. So they had the chair had 4 legs. He scooted back, and the one leg landed right on
On
my
your
big
toe.
toe. Just absolutely demolished my toe. Absolutely crushed it. And I was like, I punched him. I'm like, bro, get on my foot, He's like, I'm sorry. So that sent years
Okay.
of like toe damage to the point that like 6 months ago, I had to get my toenail completely removed, the whole thing completely removed, because they're like, we need to start this thing fresh. So after I have the surgery, or like the removal thing, which that was awful. I took a picture of it right when it was done and wrapped, and I sent it to his wife, Carol Ann, who's now happily remarried, have kids, like, awesome. And I was just like, this is Matt's lasting impact on my life. It just destroyed my toe. So that's the meaning I have.
Good.
He just destroyed my foot.
Yeah.
And so every time I can't walk, I'm like, thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
You're the best, bro.
Yeah.
So she died laughing. But anyway, so yeah, grief. Yeah, I don't know. I got on that tangent.
No, that's okay. One of the other things I'll throw in there is it's not. Sometimes people get stuck in one of the stages too, and we have to be cognizant of that. What we do with it's another matter, but it helps to understand why. Yeah. It might still annoy us and whatever, but at least if you understand why, it makes it a little bit easier to deal with. And
I think if you've been through it too, if you've walked through grief yourself, it's a lot easier to have compassion, for people that are walking through it as well.
Sure.
And same with business. So like to flip the script back to business owners, it's the same thing. If you have a business owner that's lost a company and dealt with that ramifications, they're going to be way more potentially helpful to someone that's going through it for the first time.
Sure.
Which, back to your point, why people like Vistage groups are so important, because you have so many different people in a group from so many different backgrounds that ideally people can pull each other up.
Yeah. Yes. And you never know what life experiences people are bringing into the room. I'm constantly amazed at the group of people that I get to work with, the things that they bring in, or situations that they've had in their life that they can bring to bear to help somebody else. You never know. And it's really cool. It's incredibly rewarding.
So how'd you get to this point of?
So I grew up in a family business. My dad and my grandfather started a machine shop right after World War II. And so I grew up around the business. I started going to work with my dad when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, just hanging around. I wasn't, but I was around it. And the deal was, if I wanted to be with my dad on Saturdays, I had to go to the shop. That's where he was. So he was really good about taking me. It's just, that's where I had to go. So I grew up around that, decided to go to engineering school, and swore that I would never work in the family business. It was like, okay, that's great, but I'm going to go do something else. So went to engineering school, went to work for a major, Fortune 50 company in their manufacturing management training program. And it was a 2-year program, and about a year and a half in, I realized that their values and my values didn't align. I was in a management training program, but I was gonna have to manage in whatever style the political winds were blowing in my direction inside the business. And having grown up in it takes a special kind of person to start a business, and it takes a certain kind of attitude and approach that is, shall we say, independent-minded. And I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to do it based on my values.
Right.
So that's what I was raised around, and so it wasn't going to work for me in the big company. And about that time, there was another generation. My parents had 2 sets of children, and I'm the oldest of the second set. So my brother-in-law, who was married to my oldest sister, he was 20 years older than me, and my dad was 20 years older than him. So he was kind of the intermediate generation. There was a company he wanted to buy, and they called me and said, hey, would you like to come back and run this? Because they had figured out that I wasn't really happy. And
Yeah.
so at 22 years old, I moved back to Michigan and took over running a business that they had purchased. So after swearing I would never work there, I was there 32 years.
Wow.
In a number of different roles, including when my brother-in-law decided he wanted to step aside and do some other things with our trade association and be more involved externally to the business. He asked me if I wanted to take over, and I said sure. And then I started thinking about how do I prepare myself to run the business. And the business had changed dramatically. It was probably 3 times the size of when I had joined. It had grown dramatically. So I looked at going to business school. I actually looked at going to law school. But we were part of this trade association, and we would go once a year to these meetings for management training and education. And the best part of those meetings were the roundtables. So we'd have speakers and all that, but we'd have roundtables. You put 6 or 8 people around a table.
Just some discussion, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea was there was a topic we were supposed to cover, but sometimes we'd get to that and sometimes we wouldn't. But the cool part was you start to figure out that everybody has the same issues.
Right.
And so I was introduced to Vistage, which at the time was called TEC. It stood for the executive committee. I was introduced to that, and I realized, oh, wow, this would be like going to a management training once a month. And I learn best by talking to people. I can learn reading books, but I do better if I'm talking to people. So I really enjoyed that. So long story short, I joined, and I joined a tech group, and I was in it for 8 years. Prior to me running the business, and then while I was running the business, and I learned enough. I learned a lot, and developed a very close relationship with the guy that was running my group. Eventually, it got to the point where I realized that I was not the right person to run the business, and that awareness came as a result of going to these meetings and understanding what I was good at and what I wasn't good at, and having people around me to challenge me to think about those kinds of things. So I ended up firing myself as CEO, and we brought somebody else in to run the business, and I took over business development. And that's the role that I held for the next 12 years while we owned the company.
Wow.
We decided I had 2 partners. At the end, I had 2 partners, my brother-in-law and the guy that I had brought in. We all had ownership in the business. And those 2 wanted to retire. They were substantially older than I am. And I just decided I wasn't going to borrow a bunch of money to buy them out. It was time to go do something else. And so I started. Actually, my chair, so I said I maintained a relationship with him. Even though I wasn't in a group anymore, I still talked to him probably every 6 to 8 weeks. And he started asking me, he said, okay, you're going to sell the business. What are you going to do next? And I said, well, I think I'll stay in the business. I just don't want the ownership responsibility. And he looked at me and he said, no, you're not. He said, you're going to go do something else. So we started talking about it. And over the course of about a year, I did a lot of work around what did I want to do, what didn't I want to do, what did I like, good at, basically personal SWOT analysis and strategic planning. And it came down to, he had been talking to me about being a Vistage chair for a long time. And I kept resisting. And I'll never know because unfortunately he's passed away, but I don't know if this was intentional or not, but he invited me to go to dinner with one of his former groups, which was then run by a guy that had been in my group. He and I had been members together for a long time.
Wow.
So my chair was to the point where he couldn't drive anymore. So he said, hey, I want to go to this dinner. Will you take me? And I said, sure, I'll do that.
All part of his master plan.
I think so. In hindsight, I think so. He never admitted whether it was that it was actually going on. And my buddy that was the chair says he doesn't think so, but I'm not so sure about that. Anyway, at the end of the dinner, or after when dinner was kind of winding down, my friend who was the chair of the group now comes over and sits down next to me, and he looks at me and goes, "So tell me why you're not doing this." I'm like, I don't have a really good reason for that.
Yeah. What a good question.
So yeah, it was a great question. And so about a year later, I told the owners, the guys that I was working for, I said, I have an employment agreement, but it's time for me to move on. And they were really good. I said, I have contractually, I had to give them 3 months notice. And I said, look, if you want, tell me how much time you want. If you want me to leave tomorrow, I'll leave tomorrow. You want me to stay longer, I'll stay longer. And so I stayed on for about another 6 months, and then left and started building my group in January of 2020.
Oh, perfect timing.
Yeah, it was
great
weeks,
timing.
8 weeks before we all got sent to our rooms.
Mm-hmm.
I started building a business that relied on meeting with people in person and dealing with really deep topics. So it has been. I've had challenges. I've had really great stuff. I love what I do. And I had this conversation with a friend of mine yesterday. There are times when I get, concerned that, I have my own imposter syndrome, right? CEOs, everybody has it. I have my own. I'm like, why would anybody listen to me? And can I really help anybody? And then God taps me on the forehead with a tack hammer and shows me things that says, hey, you're needed over here.
Yeah.
And, pulls me out of it, and I get to go do it again. So
imposter syndrome's a real thing. I get
that.
I get that here with the podcast too.
Yeah.
It's like why would anyone listen to this show? Yeah. And then, it's the same thing.
But they do. And the reality is we never know when we're helping other people.
Yes, true.
Or we generally don't know. Sometimes we don't. But and it can be, the lag can be a long time. It can be, we might not know for a year or 2 years or 3 years. But it helps. And that's why I do what I do.
That's awesome.
I've had a number of times where members of one of my groups will say to the group, after we deal with something, and they'll say, this is really helpful. I have nowhere else I can go to talk to people about this.
Yeah.
That's, how powerful is that?
Yeah. And that's why I said earlier, it wasn't a slight when I compared you to a AA meeting. Literally, it really is just a safe space,
right,
for CEOs and entrepreneurs to go and just say, hey, I can't talk, because a CEO could talk to their spouse, and that's great, but the spouse doesn't understand.
Right.
They don't get it.
They want to help.
Yeah.
But they just don't have the background. And our friends, same thing.
Yeah.
It's
so having someone that gets it.
Yeah.
So you've been in the groups. So you started the group 4 years ago, 2020. Yeah. Obviously, wonderful time to start an in-person group here in Michigan. Shout out Whitmer. But now you're growing it. I guess the question I had for you was, you've met a lot of different CEOs. You've met a lot of different people. I'm sure you've met people that are thriving in their role, people that are not thriving in their role. What, in your opinion, from the people you've witnessed and you see, what characteristics have made the strongest, most successful CEOs?
It's, in my biased view, it's the people that participate in a Vistage group or a Vistage type group. And so what does that mean? It's people that are open to learning, that know that they don't know, that want the counsel of other people. I would say those behaviors describe the bulk of the people that are successful. Are there exceptions to that? Sure. One of my favorite sayings is the normal distribution curve is alive and well everywhere. So,
sure.
So there are going to be people under that curve that ignore everybody else and know everything and can be successful on their own, just by their own power for whatever reason, whatever
Steve
circumstances. But yeah, it's the people that are willing to do that. And what underlies all of that? It's communication. If you think about, if they're willing to learn if they're willing to get input, the thread that goes through all of that is communication. And so then if you carry it on to, and I didn't listen to the whole thing, but what you and Mike were talking about, how does the CEO communicate with other people to deal with their own needs, to deal with the company's needs, the employees' needs, the customers' needs? Communication is what connects all of that.
Yeah.
And so that's the skill. The underlying trait or the underlying principle are the values and the character of the people. Because if they don't value communication, if they don't value the other people around them, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. I have a really strict rule with the people that I work with, and I have a really strong no asshole rule.
Yeah.
I won't work with people that I don't like. And I'm at a point in my life where I'm blessed to be able to do that. In my former life, we were forced to work with customers, not the people that I worked with, but we were forced to work with customers in some cases who were less than ethical. And I don't have time for that anymore.
No. Well, I think that's what Mike and I were talking. You can control that at least within your company. And when you are building culture and when you are building your team out, it is a good thing to have a non-negotiable that's like, this person might have the skill set, but they don't have the values. And where I think based on a lot of the conversations I've had with Mike and EOS and just other business owners, it's where people get in trouble is they ignore their core values. They ignore their vision. They ignore their why. And then they bring on people based on prior experience or skill set or, this person, I know he's kind of an a-hole, but
I think I can fix him.
Yeah, I can, he's so skilled at this thing, or,
right.
We need a salesperson and he was just the lead of sales for Ford OE, whatever, and so then companies will sacrifice their core values to get someone that they think it's like, well, he might be kind of a pain to work with, but if he gives us more revenue, it'll be worth it.
Right.
And
so what are you valuing? Are you valuing the revenue or are you valuing the core values?
And completely forgetting that your core values are what's going to get you to that revenue you want anyway.
Right.
But I think a lot of people get in trouble because they make these hires. And
one of the sayings that I think I got it from my Vistage chair, but if you hire people for what they know, you'll fire them for who they are.
Yeah.
Hire
should be a shirt for HR everywhere.
Yeah.
That's a slogan right
hire
there.
Slowly, fire quickly. Take the time, get to know people. If culture and values are important, then you have to live that way.
Yeah.
If they're not, then I was really blessed. Like I said, we had customers who were less than ethical. We didn't really have people in our business that were less than ethical. They didn't last because the organization would drive them out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the people, and we know a bunch of companies, and I have 150, 60 clients for mine, and the companies whose culture that when you walk in, culture is like, I don't know, tangential. I don't know how to say it. It's like you can taste it, you can see it, you can feel it. Like when you walk into a company and just how the employees are treating each other, you can see the culture actively happen.
Right.
And the companies I know with the best culture are the ones that have core values. They're the companies that top down say these are who we are and these are the people we want to and those are the ones that generally refer to their staff as a family. Like we're a family here, and I just think that is just such a good way to build a company. It's like the only way, honestly.
Yeah. I was raised that you just treat people like people.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, if you do that, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
My son had a chemistry teacher in high school, the first day of class and first day of lab. He said, I have a very simple rule. It's 4 words, don't be an idiot. And, that's the way I look at it. You can write all the press releases you want. You can say everything that you want. But in the end, it's what you do and how you treat people.
Yeah.
And don't be an idiot.
Yeah.
Treat people like human beings, and the rest of this stuff sorts itself out.
It'll pan out. Absolutely. I agree. I think that if people lived by that code, and even just the classic golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated,
Not that hard.
No, we'd be in a lot better space right now.
I'm lazy. I don't want to work that hard.
Right. Actually, speaking of lazy, this is a side note, but I think it was Bill Gates. I don't remember who it was, but they're talking about hiring, how the best person you can hire in like supply chain or creating things is a lazy person.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're going to they're going to figure out the process to get things done with the least amount of steps.
Steve Jobs. I can't remember who.
I've heard that before. I don't remember.
Yeah, it was just you said lazy, and it made me think of when we're talking about hiring, like one of the best people. Ironically, the best person you could hire for like a systematic type job is someone who's lazy, because they're going to work so hard to not have to work at all. And so they're going to figure out the most efficient way to create something. I just thought this was a unique way to look at it. So you lazy people out there, there's a job lined up for you somewhere. Just you got to find it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I thought it was hilarious when I heard that. I was like, that's a unique way to look at it. Makes sense too.
Yeah. Yeah.
We covered a lot. So what are you passionate about? What do you enjoy? What do you love? What are some stuff that you're like, man, I love this stuff? Because I can see the passion when you're talking about helping people and Vistage and care, but like, what do you just enjoy?
I love my kids. I love my kids and my wife. Should have said my wife first.
No, that's fine.
But that's, I like talking to people. That's, if I boil it down, I like talking and I like helping. I'm an engineer by training, so I like trying to solve problems. And sometimes they're tactical and process oriented, and sometimes they're people problems. Or how do we figure this out? How do we help you find a way through this? Sometimes it's, how can I just be an ear for somebody who needs it? That's what I'm passionate about. It's interesting. So the way our schedule works, we meet about every 6 weeks, and for a long time, I have coaching sessions with every member in between. And for a long time, I was bunching them up right before the meeting so that I was up to date on what was going on with everybody before we went into the meeting. So that would leave me with a week or so where I wasn't out meeting with the members of my groups. And I figured out that what that did was give me time to get into my own head, which is a really bad place for me to be, particularly alone. And so now I don't do that anymore. Now the one-to-ones are scheduled throughout the time where we don't have meetings. I need to be out talking to people. So whether it's, meeting with members or meeting with potential members or helping people, that's what I'm really passionate about. Because in the end, that's what matters.
Yeah.
Another one of my mentors used to say, if money will fix it, it's not a problem. Our friend that had cancer and passed away, that's a problem, because it didn't matter how much, money wouldn't have fixed that.
Yeah.
Now, whether you have the money or not is a different issue, but it's a really good way of dealing with that. I like dealing with problems. How can we make things better? I've made a lot of really expensive mistakes in my life, and if I can help other people avoid them, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. If
I can share my experience or experiences that I'm aware of that other people have, I love connecting people. And I get put in situations where I'm able to do that and help somebody find a new position, or find somebody that's looking for someone to fill a position, or solve a problem in their business. I used to, we had a corporate attorney who was a great guy. And when I started work, he had worked with my dad and worked with my brother-in-law. By the time I got to him, he was later on in his career, and he was then of counsel at a firm. And I used to tease him. I used to say, Walt, when I grow up, I want to be of counsel like you. And that's kind of what I do now. I'm of counsel. And hopefully I help people.
I love what you said when it was like, if money can solve it, it's not a problem. I've been thinking about it a lot recently. I think business owners and entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs are, we live in this like profit bubble. We live in this like, we got to make money. We got to make money. We got to, and obviously for, entrepreneurs where it's like, I just got to make enough to pay my people and pay my family. And it is a legitimate stress. But I've been thinking a lot about, we have Madeline now, we have a daughter, and I'm just like, I've been very cognizant of life is short, and family should be just as big of a passion, if not a bigger passion, than your business. Because I don't know of any people that when they work their whole life and then they blink and their kids are out of the house, that they're like, I should have been with my kids less than I was.
Yeah.
Everyone always says I should have been with my kids more than I was. And so that's just been something I've been really thinking through, with a business, half of what we do is business podcasts, is really trying to encourage young entrepreneurs that are starting families to not forget. Like, we can talk all about profits and we can talk about leadership. We could talk about company building. We could talk about all this stuff, but not forget what really matters. And God gives us a family to care for. And I think the worst things we can do is, you see it all the time with like these rich people, right? They have all this money and their kids just turn out to be absolute just degenerate dweebs because they didn't have a parent.
Absolutely.
They had everything they wanted.
Absolutely.
The dad was always, on a private jet flying somewhere, and their family's a mess,
Oh,
and money's not worth it.
The roadside is littered with stories like that.
Yeah.
So another saying that a friend of mine, very close friend of mine, said to me, is it's all about the people that are going to be at the front row of your funeral. That focused it just like that. Part of the story that you asked me about my story and how I got here. One of the things that I left out, I can't believe I forgot it, but about 2 years before we sold our business, my brother passed away, and he was 15 years older than me. He had pancreatic cancer for 4 years. He beat it for 3.5. 70 plus chemo treatments in that time. But during that time, he was skiing out west. He was water skiing up north. He was spending time with his grandkids on the weeks that he wasn't in chemo, where he felt well. And that, and the, again, meaning out of loss, right? We were able to have the conversations. We were blessed to have the time of the conversations about, life. He would look at me and he'd say, everybody says life is too short. He says, I'm here to tell you personally, it's true, and you really need to think about what you're going to do. And that played into, that more than anything played into me deciding to leave the business and go do something different. Because life is too short. And you asked me earlier about people that are really successful. But there are people in my group that are very successful, and they don't worry about money. They're incredibly generous human beings who are inspiring to be around. There's one guy in particular who came to this country when he was late in his teens and has built an incredibly successful business, and is one of the finest human beings I've ever met in my life. And he just says, I don't worry about the money. The money will show up. Yeah. And we'll find a way to do whatever we need to do. The other thing I wanted to reflect on, you were talking about young entrepreneurs. When we talk about business planning, a lot of times people will, I had this conversation this week with one of my members. where do you want to be in 5 years? And it always is, well, I want sales to be here. I want this. No, that wasn't the question. Where do you want to be in 5 years? And what is your personal plan? Because if you don't have a personal plan, the business plan isn't going to matter. Actually, the business will drag you all over the place, and your customers will drag you all over the place if you don't have a personal plan. It's funny because some of my members, they tease me because we'll start to talk about that, and I'll just look at them and they go, "All right, I know, I know what."
What do you mean by personal plan? Can you give us?
What's your personal vision? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What do you want your life to look like? Where do you want to live? How do you want to be spending your free time? How much time do you want to be spending at work? Do you have hobbies you want to develop?
So that would be me, someone saying like, I'd love for us to have a bigger house, love to have a couple more kids, would love to, be better at golf, would love to.
Right.
So focusing on the personal aspects of where you would you and your family to be.
Yeah. Otherwise, your life ends up being about the business.
Right.
And, anybody that has a business, you will leave that business one day.
Yeah.
One of two ways, either under your own power or carried out. And those relationships are terminal. They're going to end.
Yeah.
So where do you want to focus?
Yeah.
It's societally, we tend to focus more on the material stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to measure.
Well, and this big push for like the hustle. The hustle. It's like, especially in young stuff,
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is fine, and I get it. And I understand why. Like, you do need to hustle. You do need to work hard. And that's a good thing to do. But I think where, there's like Gary V, who, I don't know if you're Gary V, check is. Some of his stuff's fine. Some of his stuff's whatever. I like a lot of his stuff, but where I disagree with him is I agree if you're solely looking at it from a business. So he's like, your 20s should be nothing but work. Nothing. You don't get weekends. You don't get days off. You work 12 hours a day. You whatever. So then in your 30s, you could be where you want to be at. And I understand the why of what he's saying. And, he's looking at it exclusively from a business point of view. But it's like, I understand, but I also want people that are married in their 20s to spend time with their spouses.
Absolutely.
And spend time with their kids. And so I think it's a dangerous mind game to start playing sorry, honey, I know I wanted to go on a date with you, but I have to work, again. And that's when you see divorces and you see a lot of stuff
Absolutely.
where people are married to the business instead of to who they are. And I think you just got to be really careful and cognizant while working hard is good. And it's a good thing, not to make sure that the business is overtaking. What you said, the front row of your funeral.
Hustle is important, but focus is more important, and deciding where you want to focus.
Yeah.
As human beings, again, those of us in the center of the normal distribution curve can't focus on more than 3 to 5 things.
I can really focus on one.
Yeah, exactly.
To be honest with you.
So what do you want it to be?
Yeah.
And can it change for seasons? Sure. But in the end, where do you want to be?
Yeah, Mike always gives good coaching on this because whenever I always have a new idea of something, and he always just asks me, "Hey, what are you wanting to give up?" That's the question. He always asks, like, "What are you willing to give up to start this new thing?"
Right.
It's like I really want to start this side business, or I even actually back in when I first started the podcast because our Aflac business was really struggling, and when I told Mike about the fact that I was going to start it, he was just like. He was like, well, what are you willing to give up? And like, can you give up anything right now? Do you have the bandwidth? Because he's like, I know where your business is at. It ended up working out. And I told him the vision for this and it made sense. But that's always his first question and that's a good question for anybody is like, yeah, you want to start something new. You want to start even a new hobby. Like, what are you willing to give up to make that happen?
Exactly.
Yeah. You only have so much time and bandwidth.
So my brother, who I miss every day, used to say there isn't any job worth more than about $40,000 a year. Everything else above that is aggravation pay. I always thought that was a pretty good way of looking at it.
It's true.
Because if you think about it, what you said is true. And I watched this as I was growing up with around me. I mean, not so much my family, but other families that I knew, where the parents were incredibly successful and the kids, were really seriously screwed up.
I mean, you see that just so much.
Yeah.
Statistically speaking, if you are from an absolute, just like top 0.1% wealth and you turn out as a really hardworking, sharp kid, you're in the minority, it feels like. Which, hey, shout out to my parents for being poor. No, I was kidding. Yeah, they weren't poor. I was just kidding. Lower middle class. But seriously, I mean, it was like I have friends that grew up insanely wealthy and they're, struggling. So
Absolutely.
That's actually a really interesting thing, too, to talk about is my wife and I, like we're not wealthy in any, we're just scraping right now. Just with all the businesses we have and expenses, and we're just making it. But I always told my wife, I said, my goal is for my kids to never know how wealthy I am. Mm-hmm. So if God does bless us and we do get to wherever and it's just like money's not an issue, and I never want my kids to be like, oh, dad's got it. I always want them to trust they're going to be taken care of, but not necessarily know the full extent of, even like for college, like my kids are going to go into college assuming they're going to have to pay for it. Although now if my kids ever listen to this podcast, they know my plan. I better delete this episode, not let them listen to it.
At least cut that part out.
Yeah. So the goal is to let them go to college thinking they're going to have to pay for it. And then be in the position to pay for it if that's something, if they want to go to college, and we could talk about that. But I think that's the goal, is not, because then you have the entitled brats going to school where mommy and daddy paid for it and they don't care about their studies. They don't care about, anything because it's not their, they don't care. They don't even really want to be there. They just want to party.
Yeah.
And so for our kids, what my parents did for me, and it's such a sacrifice for them, and I'm so blessed, but they basically were like, you work, you pay for what you can, and then what you can't we'll help take care of. So, I graduated from school with no debt. And
that's huge.
From a family, my dad made $40K a year his whole life, and they just saved and saved to the detriment of their retirement, to help us kids. And, so now it's just what I just want to keep doing is just be that blessing back to them, which is when we talk about a why, like what's my why? That's one of my whys, is to make sure Anna's mom and my parents, even if their retirement didn't get set up as much as they would have liked to, because literally like they were just given to us kids, you know? And so now I feel like I have a responsibility to make sure they're never going to want for anything, and they're fine. Like they're great.
That's awesome.
That's just a why. It's like, I want to make sure they're good, and we're not there yet. We're nowhere near or any deep,
but you're young.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I'm getting older. My back kind of hurt when I woke up this morning.
Oh,
I was like, it's kind of happening, 30.
Not yet.
I already hit my midlife crisis, I feel like.
Not yet.
Hit my midlife crisis at 30, which is not good because then I'm dying at 60. if that's my midlife crisis, that's not a good sign. Oh, man. But anyway, so that's, I don't know where we're going with that, but just the why of doing what we're doing. And I can't remember what even got us on that.
I don't either.
Topic, but it was a good one. It's a good little segment there.
Yeah. Well, you had asked me about common threads for success, and then we talked about the hustle and entrepreneurship.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. But finding your why is important, but
well, and it's tied to your personal vision. I mean,
Right.
that's the beginning point of where do you want to be?
Yeah. Yeah, man, I'm telling you, there is something so appealing of just being able to be a blessing to people financially for me and Anna. Like there's something about, it's so less about what money would do for us, but what money could do for other people. And, there's a shout out, like Daniel Dorn, he's been on the podcast, he's that, and like a lot of ways, he'll fly out his brothers to have them go hunting. He owns a couple businesses, one of the smartest guys I know. He's an investor, buys companies, just insanely sharp, but he's like 33, 34, worked his butt off to get to where he's at. And I'm like, man, that's so cool. Like just to have the ability to bless people, with your time and financially is just something that really appeals to me. you know, we'll see if it happens, but that's a really
I believe
cool
it will.
thing. Yeah. We just need 1 billion people to watch our podcast episode and we'll be golden.
There you go.
Yeah, that's it. Well, man, I love this conversation. I know that, is there anything else that you were like, hey, I want to just kind of chat about this? Or is there anything that you are just like, I really feel like this could deliver value to a lot of the young listeners here? Because I feel like we covered a lot, but you have just been so ingrained in business and you know a lot of people.
You asked me what I'm passionate about. And I touched on communication. Here's something I am passionate about. It's not anything that I spend concentrated time on, but it's woven throughout how I do things. And you and I think have talked about this before, but I have a fundamental belief in our need as human beings for contact and in-person in-person whatever, which made 2020 and better part of 2021 very difficult for me. And I'm an engineer, right? So all of this is just things that I picked up and learned and beliefs that I've developed. So there's no necessarily there. I think there's science behind it, but I don't have any. I can't cite anything. If we think about, well, first of all, I have listened to some speakers on neuroplasticity and neuroscience, and our reptilian brain is about 2 million years old, and that's what controls our fight and flight, our instinctual stuff. I'm probably using the wrong words, but anyway, and our higher brain is 200,000 years old, which that's where our more emotive and relational stuff comes from, our feelings. So the reptilian brain's been around a lot longer. It's going to control us, and we know that, fight or flight reflexes. Our ancestors, if they weren't part of a group, were going to be dinner for some animal somewhere. So our need to be connected to other human beings, I believe, goes back a long way. And loss, and if you think about loss or having to leave a group, or when there's strife in your family of origin or whatever, it can be really stressful. And I believe that it's tied to all of that. We have this innate need to be connected. And I think that technology, or particularly in the last 10 years, technology is revolutionary, and we are evolutionary as beings. We don't change as fast as technology. We can't. We don't adapt.
Right.
And that's regardless of your belief on how long we've been around and all of that stuff. That part of the science exists, right?
Yeah.
So I have a really fundamental belief in communication, in human communication. One of the speakers, actually two of the speakers that I've seen in the last year have talked about the fact that in communication, 7% of the meaning we derive from the words, 38% we derive from the tone, and 55% of the communication comes from body language.
Wow.
So you can't have body language in a phone call. You certainly you can have tone, but you can't have body language. All you get in text or in a text is text.
Yeah.
It's just words.
Yeah.
And so it's a pet peeve of mine, and it's something that I will say that I lecture younger people on, is interact with one another.
Yeah.
You know, that's what makes life rich. Right?
Put that phone down. And yeah, we can talk about the theory of the brain thing, and I think that we could talk about that if we want to. But I do think where I really agree with you is the drive that people have towards and the need for in-person communication, to feel loved, to feel respected, and maybe on a separate podcast we could dive down that's an interesting thing that you brought up. I think I would have my own thoughts on that for sure. But I do think that when you mentioned the statistics for in-person communication versus that is very interesting, and it's actually why it just solidified for me why I've made this podcast in person, because I've been so like, I think that when you can just pour a cup of coffee or water or whatever you want to drink and sit across from someone, the conversations are deeper, better, and richer than you could ever get, even from a Zoom call. You know?
Oh yeah. Zoom is 2D. This is 3D. It's that simple.
Yeah. You can't see how, you know, all the small mannerisms and that you just have. It's just different. And I've lost a lot of guests as a result of it that I could have got because they're living in different states. And I'm probably gonna cave. I'm on my, but it's okay for right now.
It's okay. Some percentage of what you do, that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to go all the way.
Yeah. I'm just a stubborn person.
It's super important.
Yeah.
It's super important. Another friend of mine says after food, water, and shelter, the most basic human need is to be heard and understood.
Yeah.
And I believe that.
And I really think that's why, I mean, you saw suicide rates go up dramatically during the lockdown. And I think that's just a direct result of people not being seen, not being heard, feeling alone. And you shove people in their homes telling them they can't have that contact anymore. And it showed how much it matters, how much in-person contact matters.
It's isolation.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I mean, we can tie it back to what I do, but it's isolation.
Unhealthy. That's what it is.
Absolutely.
And so again, so just having that communication, that feel need heard, which is just really think that's why during COVID, man, I feel like everyone went crazy. I went crazy during COVID. Like I can't stay at the house. You know, I'm like you. If I'm not out doing stuff, I get in my head too. Where I struggle, I don't know if you can relate to this at all when you say, but like if I'm out meeting people, and I'm productive. I'm out, like I feel alive. I feel good, excited, hopeful. But if I have like a couple days at home where I like either don't leave the house or I just come into the office, I don't see that many people, I can get like really depressed down in the dumps very quickly.
Oh, absolutely.
And you know, I'll go and network. Like we'll do a mastermind meeting, and I'll start my day. I'm like, okay, yeah, like I'm out doing things. But if I'm at the office all day, I could be like, man, like we're struggling and I'm not doing what I should. You know, I can get really in my head fast. And then you can stay. And that's what COVID was for me.
Oh, yeah.
COVID,
for most people,
shoved me in this, like, allowed me to be in my head for like a year and a half. And I never got a break from it. And it was just absolutely exhausting. Yeah.
I went from, I mean, at our peak in our business, we had 220 people.
Wow.
When I left there, we were about 100. And some of those people I had worked with for 30 years. You know, they were long time. And so I went from being around them every day to not really being around very many people.
Massive shift.
For the first 8 weeks. I mean, I was out talking to people. And then starting in March, I wasn't around anybody. And that really took a heavy, heavy toll on me. I started having in-person Vistage meetings as soon as I could.
Yeah.
I mean, we social distanced and all of that stuff, but we were in the same room, and I was lucky. The people that were in my group at the time had no problem. They're like, yeah, we want to meet together. We want to be together. Mike Gruley and I, he and I met virtually during COVID.
Yeah.
And during a Chamber of Commerce meeting, and then we had a follow-up Zoom call. And at the first Zoom call, turns out we both we don't live very far from one another. We decided, all right, as soon as the bars open, we're going to go have a beer together.
Yeah.
So in July or August, or whenever it was that they opened in 2020, and I were sitting outside, just.
And it's almost like you get like a high. Like when you I remember the first couple of times I went back and saw a group of people, and you're like, man, like it was like an adrenaline rush. Yeah. Like my body was, like my mind and soul was craving this, and it was, just being ripped away, and it matters, and it just shows our point of how much in-person communication and just relationships and how important deep friendships are, and how important that is.
I remember being at an event, and I can't remember now what event it was. I don't remember if it was a wedding or an industry organization or what. And it must have been maybe 2022, where I realized that 12 months earlier that wouldn't have happened. It was a room with 100+ people in it. I had tears in my eyes because I'm like, this is so important. It's so important. So I'm thankful we're not in that place anymore.
It feels like a fever dream, doesn't it? It feels like like it never really happened.
Yeah.
Like it's like you talk about something that you read in your history books.
Yeah.
This like, oh yeah, a long time ago, this one thing happened where they shut down the whole nation, and you're like, wait, that happened to us.
I watched my kids go through it. Both my kids my son was in grad school, my daughter was in undergrad. My son is actually in seminary and was doing it remotely, which, that's tough. Seminary that's a people-oriented avocation. You're doing it remotely. That's tough.
Yeah.
Thank God he didn't have to do that for his entire program. But, and my daughter ended up getting moved to online, and she was out of state. She was a long way from here, so she couldn't come home. So she was isolated. That was kind of cool, though, because they had, where she was going to school, she was an out-of-state student that couldn't go home. So they had a number of those, there were about 40 of them that lived in apartments on campus. They each had their own apartment. But because they were isolated like that, they could get together because nobody was being exposed anywhere. So at least she had that. But still, it was really, really difficult.
It was great. I think what scared me was how much power the government has. Like, it was kind of like a, whoa. Like, if
I agree with that. And I don't believe they would be able to do that again.
No chance.
Not in this generation.
No chance.
100 years from now, maybe.
No chance.
If people don't understand, but.
Well, there were talks like 6 months ago about another variant for COVID that was going to be really bad. Now, obviously, perfect time for our election. Shocking. And but there were talks about this variant that was going to be awful, and it died out so fast because I was like, no. Like, everyone's just like, we're not doing this. We're not playing your game. Like, you did it once, not happening. Absolutely not happening.
That speaks to the resiliency of our country, I think.
Yeah, it shows the importance of our Constitution and the ideal that, it's the people, the people. Right. And but I think what COVID showed was actually it wasn't as much we the people as we thought it was, and it was just It
was also an opportunity to correct that, though.
Yeah, it could be.
And it did.
Yeah, it definitely did. It also just shows what fear does. Fear will paralyze you, and for people to use fear to their advantage is just it's a dirty trick. And
a combination of fear and lack of knowledge.
Yeah, I
think as an engineer, science is an iterative process, and so it doesn't bother me that there were mistakes made.
Of course,
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, you're
I'm okay with that. We've never been here before.
Yeah.
What bothers me is the reluctance to learn from them. And adjust.
Or to admit that they made it.
Yeah.
Like, that's, I think, to me, it's like, look, there's this virus. Oh, this is really funny. So the View, like the show with the crazy old ladies, in my opinion, this is like a week ago where one of them was like, it was like breaking news. And they were like, so we just found out that COVID-19, we think it came from Wuhan, China. Like, it was like they just stumbled on the most interesting piece of knowledge we've never heard before. And it was like all of the conspiracy theorists early on in COVID that were labeled like, you're crazy, this wasn't man-made, this wasn't, and people like me were like, this probably came out of a lab from China. And all the people that were shunned and be like, you're crazy, all of a sudden it's true. And all these crazy people that were crazy talk actually weren't so crazy. And it actually did happen.
Right.
And it's like, it was just so funny. I was just watching The View, and I'm like, guys, like, this is like old news. This was like 2-year-old news.
And
it's just funny.
Yeah, the binary nature of the discussions. You know, I'm right, you're wrong.
No,
it's not how life works.
Well, it's not how
I have information, you have information. Let's talk about it.
Right.
One of my closest and oldest friends, or dearest and oldest friends, he and I are 180 degrees apart most of the time on political things.
Yeah.
And my favorite conversations are with him. Because we'll sit there and say, well, have you thought about this? No, I hadn't thought about that. Well, this is information I have. Okay. It's the ability to, A, critically think, and B, have constructive discourse on things.
It's important. And it's sometimes tough to do.
And it doesn't end up with, somebody, pointing their finger and saying, you're an idiot and I don't want to talk to you anymore. No, when we part ways, we tell each other we love each other and we're looking forward to the next conversation.
Yeah. I mean, actually, ironically, I have a friend that just texted me that was, concerned, for me. And so I was like, he's more leaning left, which was actually a little surprise to me. But, and so I'm like, hey, well, let's have, because he sent me a big text of everything that he thinks wrong with, the conservative movement, blah, blah, blah. Why he's voting, Democrat. And I'm like, it was just something that I was shocked to me because his whole life he's been conservative. So I was just like, that's interesting. I didn't see that coming from you. So I'm like, hey, well, let's grab coffee. Like, I'd love to hear what got you from your whole life being a conservative to now you say the phrase like the Democrats are the sanest people in the room. I was like, that shocks me that you would say that. So let's have a coffee because I actually want to learn. I want to learn what you meant by that because that's just, we obviously don't agree on that statement. Yeah. But so that's a perfect opportunity. Instead of being like, how dare you, you idiot. Like, right. No, it's just, so we're going to have coffee when I get back from vacation. Cause I was like, literally like, I want to learn what was all of the events that got you to this point.
Sure.
Because that's a unique thing. And what bothered me the most about the whole COVID thing was new science would come out. So they would say, actually, masks are pretty much useless. But then they would be like, but you still have to wear them. And it was just like, we just proved that actually masks don't do much. And actually, there's actually probably more adverse side effects to having like kids wear masks a long time with like oxygen and stuff like that. They're like, yeah, we know it's kind of a health risk for kids, but we're still going to make you wear them. And it's like, but you, like that was for me the most, and I can understand where I also on the flip side would also, there are people in our church whose grandparents and parents, passed away from COVID. Like it's a legitimate thing. Oh, so absolutely. To shortchange it, you can't do that either.
No.
And it was a weird time, but it felt to me like it was more of a control play. They're like, we just want control. And so science would come out and then they'd be like, yeah, masks aren't really helping, but like we thought they would, or they weren't as helpful, but you still have to wear them.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I don't know if it was so much control as it was challenges with risk assessment. And who's people being afraid to put their own maybe jobs on the line. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I'm thankful that we're through it. And
hopefully never again.
Hopefully never again. Yeah.
Yeah. It was also just a worldwide thing too. That's the weird part of it. It wasn't like it was American. It was like the whole world was going through this thing.
Well, that's happened before though.
Yeah.
I mean,
like the Black Plague. Classic.
Absolutely.
Funny enough, there's a policy that I sell for insurance that covers the bubonic plague. Didn't know that was still a thing.
It is.
Is it actually?
I just read, there have been 2 cases in the U.S. that I've read about in the last couple
weeks. Well, they might get paid some cash if they have the right policy.
Maybe.
The bubonic, I don't even know what that is.
Well, the bubonic plague and the Black Plague are the same thing.
Right, that's what I thought. But I don't know. I guess I don't know what the symptoms of it are. Like when you have the black, I know it killed like a bunch of people and very contagious. I know you don't want it.
It's bacterial, as I understand it, though. So I think antibiotics help a lot, which is why we don't see it a whole lot. That's my understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Well, let's hope none of us get it.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Well, I think that, I mean, I love this conversation. I feel like whenever we do podcasts, I'm like, we could talk for 5 hours.
Yeah,
You know, it's just a
absolutely.
fun conversation. I think anyone that listened to this would feel encouraged. I think what I love about you and what you brought to the table is just your passion and the fact that I think anyone listening could tell that you just want to help people. And so any CEOs listening that are looking for a peer group like yours would 100% benefit in joining your Vistage group. I know the show would support
Absolutely.
you in that regard.
Thank you.
And is there anything else that you want to leave the people listening with? Any other final thoughts or anything you want to promote or anything like that?
I don't think so. Just, yeah, if anybody that could use a group to support them, I'd love to talk to them. And whether it's my group or somebody else, if I'm not the right fit, there are other people that do what I do, and I'm happy to help.
Yeah, and I'll throw another plug in. Jim is just a very connected person. So if there's anyone locally that is listening that just might need help in something, Jim's a good person to know.
Absolutely.
And so, man, well, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I love the conversation. I feel like there's a lot of things I wanted to talk about, but I'm like, we'll do round 2. We'll just do part 2 later.
Fair enough.
And hopefully you enjoyed it.
I did.
And we'll see you on the next episode. Everyone watching, thank you for coming by. Please subscribe, like, comment, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. How long we do? Hour and 40 minutes?
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah, it goes fast, doesn't it?
It does.
Oh, that was awesome. Oh, you hear that crack?